So my guest today on the Nerds of Color, you know him as Alvy on House, Mario on The Electric Company, and Gizmo Duck on DuckTales. On June 11th, he'll play the Parago guy in a little movie called In the Heights, dropping in theaters and on HBO Max. Please welcome to Hard Knock Life, Mr. Lin-Manuel Miranda.
Hello, Keith, longtime fan, first-time caller.
Welcome to the podcast. It's great that you're going to be on HBO Max because you're basically throwing down the streaming gauntlet. You have Hamilton on Disney Plus, Freestyle Love Supreme on Hulu, Vivo on Netflix, and now In the Heights on HBO Max. It's just like you just need a Prime Video show.
I gotta start planning my Peacock project. I've been enjoying Girls 5 Eva on Peacock.
Shout out to Renee and Sarah, right?
Oof. I shoot them. I get paid by the goose. Being genius on that show.
Really, welcome to the podcast. As you probably know from Twitter, we are huge fans, and it is an honor to have you on the show. And I'm so excited for In the Heights because in another world, we'd be hyping the Hamilton release this year, and In the Heights would have been last year. So talk about like how the pandemic kind of like flip-flopped your whole press junket tour.
Sure. No, yeah, there is a sliding doors world in which Hamilton is coming out in theaters of October of this year, and Heights came out last summer, and they happened in a very strange order. I mean, obviously, when the world shut down, I was directing my first movie. I was directing Tick Tick Boom, and 8 days of filming and the tunnel vision that comes with directing a movie, and then suddenly, everything is shut down. And I think it wasn't till about April, that first month was just about surviving and like how to make sure your kids are safe, and how to make sure most importantly your parents, the most vulnerable folks in your community, are safe. And then in April, I think we had our first conversation with Warner's, and they basically said to us, "You're one of our easier decisions of the many decisions we have to make. This is a big summer movie. Your movie deserves to be seen on a big screen. No one's going to this theater this June. It's just not happening." And so we would like to push the release to June of next year, and we'd like to circle a date so that we have it, because now everyone is circling dates next year. And I was the lone person saying no. And John M. Chu really kind of convinced me. Kiara came around very quickly too. But John, because he'd had the Crazy Rich Asians experience, really sort of said to me like, and all of these people deserve to be movie stars, and they don't get to be movie stars if you don't have the rollout that a big screen premiere has, and you don't see this big screen movie on a big screen in the way that we were able to do for Crazy Rich Asians. Because it's not just the movie itself, which speaks for itself as a work of art, but the world getting to know Leslie Grace and Melissa Barrera and Corey Hawkins and Anthony Ramos and Dasha Polanco. Again, like that was the part that convinced me like it really needs its own space, and hopefully, knock wood, and I'm still knocking wood, because the world is the world, people get to experience it on a big screen, and feel safe doing so.
Speaking of which, I mean, the timing is kind of perfect because, it's coming out in a space where people are vaccinated, theaters are opening, and it is getting that big screen rollout, right? Because if this was coming out 6 months ago, you wouldn't even have the option on the big screen. And to your point, having In the Heights on the biggest screen, I mean, it's an IMAX release. That's pretty crazy, right? See this movie in IMAX.
Crazy.
It's like you and Star Wars, right?
Right. And we both have Princess Leia's dad, Jimmy Smits. That's right. But I love that Nina Rosario's dad is also Princess Leia's dad. I will never stop loving that. But yeah, it's been, and I have to tell you, I'm so glad we waited, because I saw the movie in a theater for the first time this past Tuesday, and it was very special because it was my private screening, and it was the entire original Broadway cast and crew. So it's the crew of the Richard Rodgers. It was my dresser who dressed me for Usnavi. I sat between Janet and Andrea, our original salon ladies, and Chris and Veronica, who met his wife when she played Nina in the basement of the drama bookshop in 2002. So it was a really special way to see it. And I saw details I could not see on my screen at home. I spotted Nina Lafarga in 96,000. I couldn't spot her on my tablet at home. So there really is, and again, because it's a musical, I know how many countless theater productions have done this show together, how many casts will want to see this movie as a cast. You know, you want to see musicals so that you can clap in the theater and be in that energy together. So I'm really grateful we waited.
I can't wait to see this on a big screen either. And just for what it's worth, I mentioned the Linematic Universe earlier. This is also, I'm collecting the In the Heights gauntlet as well, because I've had Javier on the podcast. I just had Mandy on the podcast a couple of weeks ago. So like now I have Usnavi, and it's just like
they were both at the screening on Tuesday.
Yeah, I think I saw Javier's Instagram at the end of the show. So yeah, that whole like world in which In the Heights came out last year, you know, if there wasn't a pandemic, and then
right,
Hamilton
turn the time stone, right?
Yeah, exactly, like Doctor Strange. What do you think would have been different had, you know, I mean, other than no pandemic, but like had this come out early? Because I think it would just be more poetic, right? In the Heights predates Hamilton, but now it's kind of the other way. Hamilton came out, so many more people got to see Hamilton last year than before, and now In the Heights follows that. Like, talk about that, just kind of like
I think the most interesting thing about that what if scenario, Marvel Comics number whatever this is how In the Heights would have landed in that election year. That to me was the most compelling reason for keeping it where it was in an administration where we survived more demonization as a Latino community than any other previous administration. I mean, the guy in his campaign speech was calling Mexicans rapists and murderers, and they're not sending over their best people. At the end of 4 years of that, to have this giant, big budget reminder of our humanity and our place in this country, and our, you know, the fact that we are people, full stop, not you know, political pawns or demonized the other that are surging over some imaginary border. I you know, thank God the election turned out the way it did. But I also like, I think it's actually never a bad time to remind the world of our humanity.
Sure.
And, you know, we are 25% of the movie-going audience. We are the fastest growing population in the United States. The census numbers are coming in. They're going to bear that out. And I think that, but that's the biggest what if, like in terms of how, because we have an undocumented character in our movie, and Kiara's decision to
flesh out that.
To foreground that and flesh it out and give it to the character that I think is the most New Yorker of anyone here, who loves New York the most and who only wants to invest in their community. You're telling me that kid doesn't belong here? Like, again, it just puts a human face on it in a discourse that has otherized and demonized us so much. So,
I mean, speaking of
what if for me.
Speaking of the former guy, right, you had to change some of the lyrics in the song for the adaptation in 96,000. But the thing you didn't have to change, speaking of Sonny, was his verse. And his verse is as relevant in 2021 as it was 15 years ago. So talk about, like, you know, some of the changes that you had to make to the song to make it less, you know, let's just say referential to a certain guy. But then also like Sonny's verse talking about gentrification and racism being blatant and everything.
The Trump lyric, people had already been changing. Like, local productions as far back as 2015, 2016 were saying, can we not? They would literally come to the licensing agency and say, can we change this to something else? And we would say yes. And so we just sort of ratified what the culture was doing to
Yeah.
that lyric. Because when I wrote it in 2005, he was a reality TV host.
Right.
You know, it was Jeff Probst, it was Regis Philbin, he was a cartoon monopoly man. I think my parents owned a Trump board game in the 80s.
I
He
mean,
was
to be fair, he's still a
literally
cartoon monopoly man 4 years later.
yeah, but now he's a cartoon monopoly man that is like sort of has to own some of the most shameful and horrible like chapters in our history.
Yeah, he's like more
So
Doctor Doom than Monopoly Man now, I guess.
yeah, it really it took a turn. And so time changed that lyric more than I did. And then with the again, you're referencing Sonny's verse, which was what about immigration? Politicians be hating, racism in this nation's gone from latent to blatant. And again, when I wrote that lyric, I was thinking of Pat Buchanan, who was test ballooning, demonizing immigrants in his presidential run. I was thinking of the governor of Arizona, Jan Brewer, who introduced a draconian policy of making people carry around their immigration papers on them at all time. In fact, when we went to Arizona, and I played it in the tour in Arizona, we changed the lyric to Arizona be hating. And the audience that came to see our show cheered, and two little old white ladies would walk out like every night on that line. So it's sad that lyric has gotten more relevant. But again, like it's I just yeah, I mean that's the nature of musicals too, is that like time will make fools of, I'm still like hanging on to the fact that they reference a calling card.
Yeah, you didn't leave that out.
I'm like, as long as I see him on sale in a bodega, it stays in the show.
Speaking
Train was like a long time ago.
Yeah, I don't think Nina would have even that wasn't even a thing when she was a kid in this version of the movie, right?
100%.
Yeah. So no, yeah. Well, speaking of things you had to change, right? Because a lot had to be taken out for the movie because it's hard to adapt a stage musical to screen, and things had to get cut. What was the hardest thing for you to get rid of when it came to making the movie?
Well, the great news, none of it was hard because Chiara did all the hard work. When we started writing this together, I wrote on this for 3 years before Chiara came aboard, and Chiara, and she'll be the first to admit it, was like, I was playing catch up in terms of us starting to write this from scratch with the characters that you created. And we really found our focus, and we found how we were going to tell these stories and which stories to tell when Chiara came on board in 2004. I think for the movie version, it represented an opportunity for Chiara to take the lead in a real way for the first time. And she made the brave decisions. She sat in the other room while I read through the first scene and was like, well, Camila's not in the open.
You said it, I didn't.
But again, when I think about Camila now and I watch the movie, which I'm so proud of, I actually think of Cabaret. I think Cabaret is actually the best movie adaptation of a musical. I don't think anyone would say that movie isn't great on its own terms, but where's Fräulein Schneider? Where's Herr Schultz? And when I go see that show on stage, I get to see them again, and I get to hear their wonderful songs and their doomed romance. And when we see In the Heights again, like, here comes Camila, and she's going to represent, and she's going to kick ass, and that's not going anywhere. So again, like, it's okay that people mourn and people yell at me on Twitter. It's kind of like, it's okay. I have had more time to mourn than you. Yeah. And the only thing I'll add to that is that the day we filmed Breathe, I had a burst of inspiration, and I called Priscilla Lopez and was like, send me a headshot, send me a picture of you. And I snuck a picture of her into the frame onto the set. So Camila is still canonically Priscilla Lopez, and you can see her picture in their apartment in Breathe.
Oh, and I love the nods to the original cast. Of course, Olga reprises her role as Abuela. Like, I don't think anyone else can play that. I think if it ever goes on, she just has to go to every spot in the country and just play it because she's so great. There's a couple of cameos I have to say I have a little beef with Warner Brothers. Ruined in the trailer. I don't know. Can we say that Chris is in
Oh, Chris Jackson? Yeah.
Because
Okay,
when I saw him, I was
to,
like, holy shit, that's awesome. And then he's in the
you
trailer.
know,
So
again, like there are many schools of thought on what to do in trailers, right? There is the school of I agree with the policy of every new trailer should reveal a little something new and whet your appetite a little more. It had been a long time since the last trailer when we released that. So I felt okay with being like, all right, let's give him Chris Jackson. The folks who were paying attention and saw the paparazzi pictures of us already knew. But that being said, like that was a nice reveal. It gave it a little extra sort of boost on the day that Chris and I keep exploring our relationship in what I hope are not increasingly antagonistic ways.
For folks to know, like, I'll just say one thing and you should just stick through the credits. That's all I'll say. Because people may not know that.
Samuel L. Jackson may or may not show up and ask.
I mean, Usnavi, would you like to join? I need to talk to you about the Avengers Initiative, Usnavi. That would be pretty cool. Speaking of Usnavi, I did want to ask, what was it like for you to see your son take on the role? Were you like, look at my son? I mean, first of all, he played the role at the Kennedy Center a couple years, even before he was cast for the movie.
Yeah, that's when I first saw him in the role. He actually auditioned for the tour in 2011 when he was a kid.
I was going to say he was like for Usnavi or for Sonny? Because okay,
and I have no memory of it. I don't
12,
remember
right?
seeing him because he was a child. And my first memory of meeting him was his Hamilton audition, where he came in, sang my shot like he was Alexander Hamilton reincarnated, like the hungriest motherfucker I've ever seen in my life, and just like his heart beating outside of his chest. And what has been amazing has been watching that kid grow. Like in Hamilton, he was genius and he was brilliant. He was the knucklehead. Like he was like the kid who was geeked to be there among the cast, and watching his maturity grow within that company. And then seeing him at the Kennedy Center was a revelation for me. It was like, oh, he doesn't have to put anything on to play this part. Like he just is Usnavi. I wrote a Twitter thread about it that I cry when I think about it. I felt like I built this thing 10 years ago and it fits this kid better than it ever fit me. Because, I think spiritually I'm more of a Nina than an Usnavi. It's not an accident I started writing this thing when I was at school and I was one of 2 Latino theater majors at the school. So again, it was a revelation to see that the answer was so close to home in my life that I was like, oh, Anthony was the perfect Usnavi all along.
And were you already casting when he was playing that, or was it already kind of?
We were
still not
starting.
Quite there yet.
We were starting to, and John was casting a really wide net. Like he was he was going for the Crazy Rich Asians alchemy of there's Michelle, who we all have a screen relationship with, and there's like Ken, and then here's like some stars you've never met before, but they're movie stars. Here's Henry Golding, here's Gemma Chan, and
here's Snake Eyes, and now the next Marvel superhero, right? Yeah, which Anthony's in the Transformers now. Like
I know.
How cool is that?
So that's what's most exciting to me, is that like we're hopefully creating a lane for these young stars, and 5 years from now the hope is that people go, what was the big deal about In the Heights? That would be because there's like Latino movies coming out every month now. I would love for that to be the case. I would love for people to be sick of our stories. Right now, they're so hungry that there's no way that In the Heights can represent it all.
Right.
But again, that's the goal, is to create a lane for more stories to be told.
Yeah, the only oneism is what we're trying to get rid of, right?
Exactly.
Thank you so much, Lin. It has been such a pleasure. I'm so honored to talk to you in person, kind of. And,
beyond the DMs.
Pop culture with a different perspective. Watch it on your screen, hit